This is a tutorial on how to complete a residential purchase agreement. This is the OpenHome Form 100 CA, so California edition. And this is different than a CAR RPA. That's a California Association of Realtors residential purchase agreement. An entirely different form. I do have a tutorial for that form, and I will link to it in the description. And we'll go through this form entirely, and I think by the time we're finished, you'll feel pretty confident that you'll be able to complete one on your own and actually have a good knowledge of the elements that go into a California purchase agreement. So we'll jump right into it. Now I'm here in the OpenHome Forms Manager. Let me go back. So this is my dashboard. I go in. I have this form set up with some sample information. Now it begins with the date that we prepare the form. So I just put in today's date. And then I put in the name of the buyer or buyers if there's more than one. Now the address is going to automatically populate here. We have the county name. Let me fix that little typo. Assessor's parcel number, which can be found on the property tax bill, on the county assessor's website, on the MLS, on something like Realist or one of the solutions that is linked with the MLS with tax data. The seller can tell you. And if you really can't find it, you can leave the parcel number blank and come back to it later. But it's good to have to help identify the property. Purchase price, I just put in some made up purchase price here. This is the numerical value. Then we confirm that amount in a text format to prevent any sort of typo, because this is obviously a very important component in the offer. So we want to make sure that we do it right. So we have the numerical value here, the text value down here. I've just written out $800,000 and dollars is already right there. The close of escrow period, we can do a definitive date here, or we can just check a box and write the number of days, which is more common. And I put 30 days, which is a typical escrow period. For representation, we have the brokerage name, which is automatically populated here. And we put in the listing brokerage up here. Finance terms, we do the earnest money deposit right here on line 16, which is typically 1 to 3% of the sales price. So I put $8,000, which is 1%, of course, of the $800,000 purchase price that we're offering. Now, if this was a cash offer, you would check this box right here on line 18. But we're going to pretend this is a financing offer and that the buyer is putting 20% down. So the loan amount is going to be $640,000, which is 80% of $800,000. And then we're going to put the remainder of the down payment. Now the down payment is 20%, but there's already $8,000 of the EMD or the earnest money deposit on here. So we just put the down payment minus the earnest money deposit, and that's $152,000. So if you add up these lines 16 through 28, it should total the purchase price here. And this is how you can balance your math. All these numbers in this section should equal this number, which is equal to the sales price. Then the buyer is going to initial at the bottom, and we move on to the next page. Now page 2, by default, it gives the buyer 3 days to present the proof of funds or the pre-approval letter from the lender. Quite frankly, this should be included with the offer to begin with. A professionally presented offer should include a proof of funds and a lender pre-approval or pre-qualification, whatever you want to call it, but basically a lender verification letter. But if not, you have 3 days from acceptance to present it. And let's jump into the closing costs here. So I am filling this out in terms of what's customary for Southern California. In Northern California, it varies, and I'll explain a little bit more on that shortly. But just to give you an idea of kind of the point I'm working from, this is Southern California. And in Southern California, the seller pays the majority of closing costs. So I think in general, the seller should always pay for smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, and water heater compliance, because they own the property and they have a responsibility that's called for by the state, that the seller must convey the home with the proper detectors and a strapped water heater. So I have the seller box checked here. We're going to have the seller pay for the natural hazard disclosure, again, required by state law. And I checked the environmental box. It's just for good form. And then I put fastnhd.com, which is our preferred vendor. Seller shall pay for termite inspection report. Now, this offer, so there's different purchase agreements out there. I mean, if you do a web search, you can find different purchase agreements. The CAR form RPA is the most prevalent, and that form doesn't call for a termite inspection implicitly, or explicitly, I should say. It's implied that the buyer will have to write it in if they want the seller to pay for one. What's nice about this form is it says termite inspection right here, so it'll remind you to either address it and if so, who's going to pay for it. We've checked seller. Seller typically pays, especially in Southern California, and we put performed by seller's choice because if the seller's paying, let them choose what vendor they're going to get out there for the inspection. We move on to title. We have, again, Southern California, the seller pays for the owner's title policy. So we check the seller's box. Title company shall be. You can write in seller's choice. I prefer to always propose a company. So I'd write, XYZ title or seller's choice. That way you have the language in here that gives the seller the right to choose or your proposed title company if one isn't selected by the seller. And then because, I want to expand on that, you want to eliminate ambiguity as much as possible anytime you're doing real estate forms. So a buyer and seller each pay their own escrow fee. That's customarily seen. Escrow company shall be. Now I like to use title and escrow, the same company for both services. That's how it is virtually everywhere outside of Southern California. For some reason, they like to split it up. I owned an escrow company in the past for several years, and I now know, since I know how the back end works and how the sausage is made, that's a less efficient form of settlement. So I prefer to have the title company and escrow be the same, but it's your call. And you can write XYZ, or you can write or seller's choice. And then you can check this box. Escrow company is same as title company if you prefer. Just to show that it is the same company that's going to be doing both, or just leave it blank if it's not. Again, Southern California, it's often separate. You'll have a title company here and just a standalone escrow company here. And most buyer's agents will write seller's choice because the seller chooses in Southern California. But I always recommend proposing a company and then writing or seller's choice. Here we have sellers paying the county transfer tax, city transfer tax if it's applicable. If there's an HOA, sellers paying all the HOA related fees. Sellers paying for a home warranty, and I have a dollar amount equal to or less or less than $800, basically putting a limit in terms of what the budget is for a home warranty. And I think that it should be the buyer's choice. Now, of course, I'm adding some of my own opinion to this, as from the perspective of a broker, but it's your call. I mean, you're filling out the form. I'm just giving you input as a seasoned broker. But one of the reasons why I suggest the buyer's choice is because the buyer is the one stuck on the customer service line getting their water heater repaired. And so if the buyer chooses the company, they can't blame the seller for choosing a company with lousy service. It's really the burden's on the buyer because they get to choose the company that they think has the best service. So that's why I always let the buyer choose. Then we have these auxiliary lines here. If you want your buyer to pay for your transaction coordinator, you could put it here. If there's another fee that you want one of the parties to pay, put it there. That's what these blank lines are for. And then you'll have the buyer initial, and we'll move on. The items included and not included in the sale. So you'll see the language: all washing machines, all laundry dryer, all and this is just to make this absolute. Imagine a scenario where there's a refrigerator in the garage and there's a refrigerator in the kitchen. This is saying all refrigerators. Larger homes might have a washer and dryer downstairs and upstairs, or in the garage and upstairs. So the point is that we're saying that if you check this box, all the respective appliances do convey. All television wall mounts, including television. This of course is important to distinguish between the brackets on the wall and the television attached to it. And then there's some auxiliary lines here if you want to add something else like that might not be included in the sale. Generally speaking, fixtures permanently attached, that conveys in a real estate sale. And then personal items are typically stuff that can be moved, like let's say a large ceramic pot that holds a tree or something like that. So if you want to add something that is a personal item, or let's say like there's a golf cart in the garage and you want that to be included in the sale, you could write that here. Because maybe you live in a community, like a golf community, or a community where everyone likes to ride around in golf carts. You could add that there. Anyway, I'll move on. So now we come down to the contingency period. Oh, I should say there's a few other things worth mentioning. So leased items, this has come up a lot due to solar panels. So there's some language in here. Also, two other things, security systems and charging for electric cars. That could also be mentioned there. So you want to pay attention to those details of things that have been added on by the seller. Okay, we have the contingency section. Now by default, the buyer has 17 days of contingency period for their loan, where they can back out and get their deposit back based on the premise of not being able to obtain a loan. If this is a cash transaction, they can check the box no loan contingency. If they want to modify the 17 days for more or less time, you can put that here. Same with appraisal. If it's cash, you don't need an appraisal contingency. By default, the buyer has 17 days, and that of course can be increased or decreased by changing the days here. Then finally, the inspection contingency. By default, the buyer has 17 days from acceptance to perform their investigations. And at that time, the buyer will be expected to remove their contingencies in writing. Of course, that period, like above, can be increased or decreased. Or the inspection contingency can be waived. Now, I'm going to add my opinion here. I think this is a very extreme move and should not be done in general, unless it's a highly, highly seasoned investor that knows exactly what they're doing. But if you choose to do so, you can check this box. I think that just reducing the number of days in the inspection contingency is a much safer bet. The seller has 7 days to deliver disclosures to the buyer. If that needs to be reduced, let's say it's a very short escrow. Let's say you're doing a cash deal with a 10-day escrow. You could reduce to 7 to 5 or less days. And it'll be reduced right here in this section. Now there's a bunch of statutory verbiage here and provisions that go into detail about what sort of remedies there are in case there's an issue with one party or another and one party wants to back out or something like that. But it's worth skimming through and reading. Buyer's going to initial, we move on. More language here in terms of closing and possession. For example, by default, this is an owner-occupied offer. If it's non-owner occupied, like this is a second home or vacation home, you'll check this box here. The keys and possession in general of the property is delivered to the buyer the day of recording at 6 p.m. unless it's changed here. But by default, that's when it's delivered. Now over here we have dispute resolution. We have mediation as the first course of action. Arbitration. Now on each page, the buyer is going to initial on the bottom, but here arbitration is unique because to elect the arbitration clause requires additional initials within this box right here. And this basically says that should mediation not resolve the dispute, arbitration is the next course of action as a measure to avoid litigation or an expensive legal battle. And then we have additional provisions. Again, this is statutory text that relates to different provisions that'll come up. Legal requirements, legal disclosures, We have the buyer initialing here at the bottom, like the rest of these pages. Every page has a buyer signature line at the bottom. Now, by default, this offer becomes invalid the third day after it's been created. So it says if by 6 p.m. on the third day, and then it gives you the space if you want to change it. Like let's say you want to put more pressure on a listing agent and you want them to respond by the following day at 5 p.m. or in the evening, you could put that in there and basically shorten up this 3-day period in which this offer is active. And then the buyer will sign down here. Now there are buyer initials that do not need to be done now. These exist simply for when the seller initials and the buyer's acknowledging the seller initialed page. We have the acceptance down here at the bottom. The seller is going to accept in this box here. If the seller is going to counter, the seller is going to check this box and the seller is still going to sign in this box. There must be a signed offer no matter what. This just means that the signed offer is contingent upon whatever terms are further negotiated in the counteroffer. Real estate broker confirmation, listing broker information you're going to fill out here. Your information is going to be right here. Your name and your brokerage will automatically populate from your profile. You can add in your address and the other information here. Your buyer is going to initial. And then finally, this last page, this shows who the escrow holder is going to be. This does not need to be filled out when the offer is submitted. But ultimately, the escrow holder will need to fill this out, and the parties will acknowledge who the escrow holder is at the very bottom here. I do hope you found this helpful. Please leave a comment with any questions. I know there's a lot to this offer, but it's actually simple. When you go through it once or twice, you'll become very comfortable with it. And feel welcome to email info@openhometeam.com and leave a comment as well. We'll be happy to answer it on YouTube. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found it helpful.